It's morning in the big city. Last night, I had a discussion where the person I was speaking with was basically surprised that I liked miniatures games. It didn't take long to sort things out, because, well, I guess my generation of gamers really grew up without much miniatures play in our role-playing games. Actually, basically no miniatures play in our role-playing games. And the general consensus at the time was many of the reasons why the games developed the way they did was to get away from the tabletop and into the world of the imagination. But yeah, I also played war games. And war games, of course, really can't be done in the theater of the mind, or, I can't. But there is an overlap. There is that experience where you're playing a game like Mech Warrior, of course, which grew from an actual war game. So when it comes down to mech battles or space fighter battles, whatever, it's very compelling to want to bring those miniatures into the game. And because you're already using your established role-playing characters, it doesn't really mess with the dreaded immersion. But here's the thing. The ongoing persistence in connecting immersion with such a small field of the role-playing experience, connecting immersion only to character, it really needs to come to an end. The activity of engaging in a hobby, whatever hobby it is, has the capacity to swallow you up, to get you invested, to cause you to lose track of time, to, lose yourself in the experience. Isn't this really what we're talking about when we're talking about immersion? Can't the guy sitting next to you who is calculating the progression of the character, if it survives, down to the last experience point, to the boundaries of the system, isn't that person as immersed in a role-playing experience as the thespian sitting next to you who's got a floppy hat on and other costume effects and speaking in a funny accent? I mean, does it always have to keep coming back to the character? Yes, it's a role-playing game. We are sitting down to play a role, but not everybody does that. The original people didn't seem to do that. They seemed to be quite content with running avatars, bringing in all of their real-world knowledge and skill into their preferred medieval settings. And they seem to take great pride in developing adventures or situations or modes of play where that was expected. All the in-jokes, for example, are signs of this. The willing intrusion of the real world into the fantasy world. Whereas someone who didn't want any of that might have rejected a lot of the names of characters that were used. There are all these hints that it was quite acceptable in the early days for the character to be you with different stats. We've grown away from that. We've added immersion in character to immersion in the experience. And I think that bears considering. Now, the conversation I had last night revolved around miniatures. And again, like I said, why I would want to do that, because clearly I like an immersive style of play. And again, I don't see the disconnect. As I've described before, war games, games like Battletech, even Starfleet Battles, where you're not even representing a single pilot in a single machine, but you're representing, a crew. All of these things can transport you. The ability of a battle mech to capture your imagination because it's anthropomorphic or because it's just cool. The ability of the armored warrior sitting on, the dungeon tile or whatever people call them these days before you, I can see would be exactly the same. Well, I didn't get involved in any edition of D&D past first edition, and so I missed out on the very aggressive and pervasive spread of miniatures through the hobby for role-playing only. I don't have any reason to object to it, and I find it kind of odd how easily the community will polarize over differences in play. Oh, you like immersive play, so I don't want to play with you. Or you don't like immersive play. Or you use miniatures, what's wrong with theater of the mind? Or you use theater of the mind, how can you possibly, calculate if a backstab or a fireball would actually work? That's just GM fiat. And all of these divisions. Well, these are preferences, and preferences are good. But can't we all just get along? Why can't you enjoy the fact that I enjoy the way I like to play, and hopefully I can enjoy the way you like to play, and we don't have to play together, right? We should be able to talk about how we play and find the people we can connect with. Remember, the founders of our hobby were big wargamers, and miniatures and cardboard chits were pretty much the bulk of their experience up until they created something new. And they created something new to get away from the miniatures, but they couldn't escape from all of their experience. The way they wrote about the game, the way they pictured the game, the way they described the game was all couched in these war game terms or terminology or shorthand methods of description. So even though they were playing in the theater of the mind, they didn't use miniatures except for the most grandiose battles, we are told. They had all the experience of long-term miniatures gamers to populate, to shape that theater in their mind. And if this is not something that you've tried, if you've not expanded your experience to include something like using physical representations and detailed measurements, or heaven forfend, charts, maybe it's time you considered expanding your horizons. You might discover something which increases your enjoyment and excitement. So just in case the meaning has gotten lost in the details, what I'm saying is not you need to play with miniatures. What I'm suggesting is, if you've so far only experimented with one kind of role play, and I'm not talking about one game, although especially if you've only played one game, but if you've only tried one method of running the game or playing the game, shouldn't you investigate other methods?